Hey everybody, welcome to How Death Became the New Wellness Frontier. Thanks everybody so much for being here. I promise that it is a cheerier topic than the panel suggests. We have some great speakers here for you today. I think they're going to teach you and teach us all a lot about death and grief in this Instagram age of it all. So I'm going to get started by introducing our panelists. We have Rebecca Feinglass, who is the co-founder and CEO of Grieve Leave. Woo! We have Darnell Lamont Walker, who is a death doula, Emmy-nominated television's children writer. And we have Jamie Thrower, who is also a death doula. She's also the creator of Queer Grief Club. And I'm David Oliver. I'm the deputy wellness editor at USA Today. Thank you guys so much for being here. I wondered if you could each talk about a bit about what you do, just because people may not be aware of all these different terms.
Thanks. Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for wanting to come listen to us talk about death. It takes a special person to be in this room. I'm Rebecca Feinglass. I'm the founder of Grieve Leave, which is a grief support organization where we help people all over the world talk about death and non-death related losses because we grieve it all. I'm based in Durham, North Carolina.
Yeah, right on. I'm Darnell Lamont Walker, a death doula, children's TV writer and author. I work a lot in storytelling with death, with kids, and with people overall who want to just unblock and unlock their creativity. And so I'm glad to bring that to the death space with these folks. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Jamie Thrower and I am a death doula, I am a grief and death educator, and I also run Queer Grief Club, which is an online advocacy and support space for anyone in the queer and trans community who are grieving anything. We talk a lot about death loss, but also the non-death loss, communal loss, collective loss. And I also teach a lot of death and advocacy classes and courses and workshops for the queer and trans community because it's really important that we protect ourselves and that we really advocate for ourselves at end of life and in the grief space.
Well, great. Thank you guys so much for sharing that. I'd love for you to explain to the audience what exactly a death doula is for those who might not know that term.
Oh, okay, me. I'm like, go for it. So at its core, a death doula is someone who supports an individual or family at the end of life, at the core. But we bring ourselves to this work, and so we all do something different. Like I said, I'm a storyteller, and so I come in, and my support looks like helping people tell their story before they die, whether that's an obituary or a memoir, or anywhere in between. So thinking legacy projects or just want to leave something behind for the family and the nephews and the children. At its core, I know you could talk about what you do as well and what you bring to the work, but at its core, support at the end of life, which I always like to say we've all done that. So we've all been death doulas in some way, and it's not always death loss. Sometimes it's, relationships or jobs, but holding that space for grief and remembrance and loss.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that is amazing about death doulas is that we kind of serve as this guide and companion for the end of life and for also just big change and transitions. And when you think about death, when you think about grief, so often we are not taught anything about it. And so when you are going into something, you have someone who is terminally ill, or you need to plan a funeral, or you are worried about what might happen after your person dies, it's hard to find that information, and it's hard to find that information in real time. So when you have a death doula who is there, who is really knowledgeable about end-of-life experiences, about what is helpful, they can guide you on how to ask for more help, how to bring in more support, who can show you different ways of showing up for this monumental and huge life experience, which is death, which is grief. So I think it's really, death doulas can do so many things. And like Darnell was saying, we all have kind of our specialties of what makes us a particular death doula. So for me, like, I feel really proud to be a death doula for queer and trans people because I really want to advocate for us. I really know what pieces of our experience need to be held with a little more reverence, with a little more care. And I also am really proud to educate people and help normalize this experience, which is something we all go through, but we have really distanced ourselves from playing a part in death and in grief.
I guess what cultural shift happened to make grief become part of our wellness ecosystem? Like, there are grief influencers, these people included, of many followers talking about these topics. What happened to make it more, I guess, somewhat more palatable to people instead of just sort of whispering about it at funerals?
COVID. I think the pandemic changed everything, right? I'm thinking about just a little bit about my own story. My mom died when I was 13. She was diagnosed with glioblastoma when I was 5, so it's the deadliest form of brain cancer. If you're doing the math there, she lived for 8 years, which is really atypical for someone with that kind of brain cancer. And I feel like talking about grief, talking about mental health just was not in the vernacular in the same ways it is now, 20 years later. My dad died almost exactly 6 years to the day. So if I'm a little in my feelings, this is like the right space for it, right? Tomorrow will be his 6th death anniversary. He died on day 1 of COVID lockdown. Not a great time. Totally out of the blue, totally random, did not see it coming, talked to him on the phone 2 hours before. I think it was at that moment that I certainly felt over the next year and a half very overwhelmed by grief, because not only was our entire world different, right? Everyone was grieving this change in a sense of normalcy overnight. All of us were at home, all of us were on Zoom, like everything was different, and death was at the forefront of the news every single day. So I think people were just talking about grief and loss on the internet, especially because we had nowhere else to put those feelings, right? Like, all of us were feeling a sense of grief. I just was unlucky enough to have like a triple whammy of it with my dad. I also got divorced a year after that, but that's a whole nother story, and came with its own grief. But yeah, COVID really pivoted, I think, the global conversation from grief being this very strange niche thing that like we whisper about to it being on the cover of like every newspaper. I don't know, what do y'all think?
Yeah, no, yes, it was absolutely COVID. And we saw that we are not meant to grieve alone because we were so lonely at that time. And I was in New York, and I remember at the time I wasn't intentionally doing this death doula work, but I'd been doing the work since I was a kid, right? And at the time it was like, oh, I'm watching these people in nursing homes and hospitals die alone, and the family wanting to get there and not knowing what they could do. And it was like, okay, I need to step into this. And so it was COVID for sure that made people say, I want to be better at this thing for other people. I saw what happened when my mom had to suffer in her room by herself. And if I can step in and do that, then why not? And thankfully, you know, more people are saying, 10 years ago, we weren't talking about therapy, we weren't talking about being a death doula, but now we're at brunch saying, you know, well, I could use a death doula for my aunt, you know, and I get a call probably every couple of days from someone saying, you know, I never thought I would reach out to someone like this, but a friend of mine said I should, because we're talking about it.
Yeah, I think the way that communication and the way we reached each other really changed in COVID. And I think it's also, I feel very, I don't know, it feels kind of incredible to be here on this stage 6 years, like thinking about exactly what this day was 6 years ago. And how that just changed the trajectory for every single person in this world. There is not a single person who has not lost something from the pandemic, and it is ongoing, right? Like we continue to be changed by this, and the way we lose people and the way we show up for grief experiences really impact the way we move through the world. And so I was someone who grew up with a ton of loss and death in my life. And when COVID hit, I remember looking around and just going, oh my gosh, there's so much death everywhere. There's so much grief everywhere. And we really need to be talking about this. And we really need to find the ways to show up. And we need to get creative because we can't reach each other anymore in the ways that we can. So Zoom became much bigger than it used to be. Like the ways we started live streaming funerals, and like all of these things were not they're not brand new ideas, but we had to really rely on them more. And so for me, I was like, I've been talking about death and grief my whole life, but I was always kind of just the weird kid who was willing to do that. And then when our social media platforms started growing, when our technology started evolving, and when people's interest and their ability to tune into this kind of stuff really changed, I've seen such a shift. And it's really like we are allowing ourselves to show up for this moment instead of saying, oh, this doesn't belong to us. Like, we all belong to each other. And death and grief are things that we should not go through alone.
Absolutely.
What has surprised you about your own journey with grief, and how do you bring that into your work?
I'm like, okay, yeah, no.
No order.
One of the things that I will say that surprises me the most about my grief is how I use it now as like an inner ballast. It's a way for me to continually check in with my priorities and the way I move through the world, and allowing myself to really see kind of the magic that is, we are beautiful human being animals that are wired for attachment, and we are on this very liminal and short amount of time on this earth. And so how do we show up for this moment knowing that we don't know what happens next? And so I am always I think if you would have told me 10 years ago that I would be talking about my mother's death, about my father's death, about my child's death in a way that I could do so and feel empowered, I don't know if I would have believed you. And I think that grief is one of those things that changes and grows with us, but only if we are allowing ourselves to actually be immersed and understand and start to kind of think about what it means for us. So my grief personally is the driving force behind what I do. It is the constant. It is what makes me show up to this work every day. And it's not just my own personal losses, but the collective losses of my community, and of just our general grief that we are experiencing as human beings who are really struggling through this world right now.
Same. No, really. But, for me, it's what surprised me most is how grief has changed shape over time. Like so many losses we've all experienced. And, I grew up with the thought that grief looked a certain way, that grief looked like falling apart in Walmart in the egg section or at the red light for 20 minutes. And now doing this work and dealing with my own grief over time and sitting, weekly with folks who are grieving themselves, grieving the lives that they won't get to have. And I get to say, well, and when people come up to me and say, I haven't grieved the loss of my parent, and it's been 3 years and I don't know why it hasn't happened yet. And I say, well, what have you been doing in the last 3 years? And they say, I started gardening, and I run, and I go to comedy shows. I became a comedian. And I'm like, well, that's grief too. Grief changes shape. And so that surprised me about my own. Grief is still, yes, crying at Walmart and sitting at the light and breaking down, but it's also the laughter and the fun and building that community with people, and the driving force in the work we do. It's what brought us to it. as a kid, I've been doing this work since I was about 9, unofficially, because my grandmother did this work, and she'd never heard of what a death doula was. This is just what people do for people they love, right? And so it wasn't anything that was, inaccessible or anything. It was just, this is what you do for people you love. And so all the folks that I helped along the way taught me that. I was 13 when I led my first grief circle at a playground, because the school, back then schools were like, well, Pam died. If you need to talk to a guidance counselor, the door is open. Otherwise, have a good day. And it was, maybe we should talk about Pam, And now when we talk about Pam 30 years later, it's laughter. And, oh, you remember when she did this thing? And, so, yeah.
Okay, what I'm about to say, I hope it doesn't offend either of you, because I love all 3 people on the stage. We know each other well, we love each other. Okay, what surprises me most about my grief journey, I was not the weird kid growing up. Sorry, I was not talking about death. I was not holding a grief circle on the playground, but I love that for you, Darnell. That's awesome. And I was not the kid that was talking about death or was interested in death. I had a dead mom, or a sick and dying mom, for basically my entire early childhood. But I spent a lot of time pretending that I didn't and trying to be very optically normal, very seemingly normal. And talking about grief was never in the cards at all. I needed to be very successful, I needed to have a lot of friends at school, I needed to look cute, and all of that worked great for me, seemingly, until Dad died, and COVID, and divorce, and it's just, my grief became insurmountable, and maybe the whole time it was actually insurmountable, right? I was just pretending it wasn't there, because that's what we're taught as a society to do. So now, if you were talking to me as a kid, being you're gonna be on stage talking about your 2 dead parents and talking about grief, I would have never believed you. I would have thought I'd be president of the United States at this point. This was not the vibe. And now here we are, and look at how beautiful of a conversation this is, that we can talk about grief in this way.
Totally. Thank you all for sharing those things. My dad died almost 4 years ago, and it's totally transformed any way that I've thought about grief, and it's made me write about grief at work in ways I never would have expected, and it's made me, meet all of you and many other people and talk about this work, so it's so appreciated, and I'm glad that we can talk about this. Something that also I think comes up when we talk about grief and death is that there's a lot of sanitized language. This person passed away, this person's lost, the dog went to the farm, all that kind of stuff. How do you try and educate people or make them comfortable to use kind of real things to talk about it and make it less of just something uncomfortable?
I'm thinking about one of our most controversial videos that we've had on the Grieve Leave Instagram, was why we try not to use euphemisms like passed on, and we say died or dead in the educational content that we create. And for me, and just for kind of our philosophy around how we teach people about grief, when we sanitize it and we try to make it pretty, we are setting ourselves up for failure when it comes to how grief actually feels. It's not pretty, it's not sanitized, it is not in neat stages. That's just not how grief works. And if we talk about grief more directly, use direct language, and acknowledge my person died, I find that empowering and culture shifting for how we can actually talk about this very human thing that all of us will face. But damn, we got a lot of backlash on social media. And I will say out loud, some of that backlash was from people who had lost children, and that they did not at all want to use the language, my child died. And my take on that, having never lost a child, is whatever language works for you and how you talk about your own grief, do it, use it. And we as an organization want to encourage talking about that death head on, but you are the expert in your own grief.
So I write for children, shows like Blue's Clues and Lila and the Loop and Work It Out Wombats, a lot of PBS stuff. And so I've been fighting for years to get an episode about death on one of these shows, and finally someone said yes. Thankfully, yeah. And so, and we have, I think the numbers right now in the U.S., I think it's 7 million children now who have experienced the death of someone very close to them. And so we have to talk about it, and with children, we have to talk about it with such clear language, always, to start the conversation. Now, if it changes later, that's fine, but as long as they have the understanding and the basis of what it means, and I think that's important for all of us. Like, again, use the words you need to get through this, as long as you understand what actually happened. Because with kids, you tell a child, oh, well, grandma went to the hospital and just didn't come back, and now your kid's scared to go to the hospital. Grandma fell asleep, and she won't be waking up. Now your kid's scared to go to sleep, and we see this so often. And so even in this episode I just wrote, it's, she died, and now you create a space where they can ask questions. And a lot of the times it's fear that the parents have of getting it wrong, but we can figure this out together if I don't know it. But you have to be clear in the beginning. And then whatever you want to use after that, as long as there's that understanding, go for it. I will meet you where you are. When I talk to my clients and they say, oh, someone passed away before. Yeah, okay, right on. What happened? And then I get them to talk about the death. And so that's important, yeah.
Yeah, I think similarly, just being able to lead by example in the ways that I am talking about death and dying and grief. And though we all have so much language and lots of different language for describing what we are experiencing, to me, it is really important to be very clear. But I think a lot of times it's, we see the words death and dying and grief even as these they're sharp words. It doesn't feel like it gives enough humanity or support or gentleness in this space. And I feel like there is a lot that you can do, and that those words don't have to be so loaded that they get to just kind of exist where they are. And for me as well, though I don't work primarily with children, I do work with a lot of autistic adults. And language is so important, and being clear about language is really important. And so when euphemisms or things are used that will not make sense to someone who has a neurodivergent brain, then the grief experience, the death experience becomes even more cloudy and even more confusing. And so I feel like when we can use clear language, but also show that there is lots of kindness and compassion and gentleness and so many things, that we get to normalize this language a little bit more for all of us, and then we feel a little less scared to use it in a regular everyday life.
I'm wondering about, what do you think needs to change in terms of, I guess, more traditional grief support, like in religious institutions, funeral homes, or even just institutions, like work? How do you want things to change?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. Are y'all okay with me? Okay.
Get 'em.
Okay. A little origin story about how Grieve Leave started. I made a joke before that I wanted to be president of the United States, but that's not a joke. I was very much on a linear track, working in government and policy and education. Everything was going great. And then my dad died, and then I got divorced. And I live in the South. I live in North Carolina. And I was pursuing grief support. I wanted to find grief support that felt relevant to me as a young woman, still young, I think, in my 30s, who had 2 dead parents way too early and was also seeking grief support for a non-death related loss too. And y'all, I could not find it. I found tons of religious church basement groups. I found a couple of groups located in hospices. My dad didn't die in a hospice. It just didn't feel relevant. And when I showed up, I gave him a chance. I showed up at those groups. I was the youngest person by decades. And 2 times someone asked me if I was on staff, helping. I was like, okay, well, I was already feeling isolated enough. Now the grief support that I've bravely sought out is making me feel even more isolated. That's not helpful. So I ended up leaving, getting off the trajectory of my job, and I ended up founding Grieve Leave in part to create more grief support that felt relevant to people. We host sad hours instead of happy hours. Y'all should come. But we will host grief support events in bars. We're having a yoga class at the end of the month. Like, having a grief support conversation that doesn't feel like grief support, it's just chilling with other people who get you and who get those experiences, that is game changing. I can also talk more, but I'll let y'all speak and maybe we can come back to it, is speaking about grief support in the workplace, but I'll pause and let y'all talk.
Yeah, I mean, it's the conversation. I want us to actually talk about it. We don't talk. We don't have these conversations. Most of the clients I work with, you know, it's when getting to the part, when it's the family, not the person who's dying, but the family. It's like, I am going to fall apart when this happens. Sometimes it's not the death. When I put my mom in hospice, I'm going to fall apart and there's no one there for me. And so then I get into those conversations of, well, who's your community? Who are the people who can help put you back together when that needs to happen? And it's usually, I don't have anyone. And because sometimes we've pretended for so long to be the strong one, or you know, faith has played a huge role. We're talking about the church. I know churches that will not talk about. Cheap plug, I wrote a book called Never Can Say Goodbye, and The Life of a Death Doula. It's about my experiences, and I've been pitching it to churches like, I want to come in and talk to your congregation, and people said, no, they are not ready to have that conversation. Using the death word is hard for people. I'm like, this is a church. You talk about death every Sunday. This is every Sunday.
I had a retirement home that said talking about death would be a little too scary for everyone. And I was like,
yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, which is strange. And so I want that to change. I want to have those conversations, however you can have them. I think it's meeting people where they're at the bar. We've all figured out ways to have, sneak in the conversation. I'll go in with, oh, I love this song. What's the last song you want to hear when you die? And then they're like, oh, I never thought about it. And then 20 minutes later, they realize what's happening, and they're like, okay, but it's still hard. And so stop pretending to be the strong one. Actually have those conversations, and you will realize that not everyone, excuse me, but you will realize that people around you are more open to it than you think. But again, going back to COVID, we've seen what happens. It's the loneliness epidemic. We are lonely, and we want community. And so if you can just build that, I promise it will help.
Yes. I come to grief work with a strong advocacy for queer and trans people, because as someone who was looking for grief support where I felt like I was going to be really seen for my relationship, for myself, for all of the ways I moved through the world, and I could not find that. And I found that the grief world was also very binary and very heteronormative and very, you lose a dad or you lose a mom, and it didn't make a lot of space for the way that queer people have relationships, the way we value family, the way we experience loss. That is also, our grief experiences are shaped sometimes by our identities. Like, what happens when you go to a grief group and you get misgendered the whole time? And what happens when you are looking for a specific type of grief, but they say, oh, this is only for motherless daughters. And if you're non-binary, I don't really know, maybe you can come in, but you have to know everything is gonna be ladies and girl boss and all of that stuff. And so I was like, I wanna create a space that grief to me is so fluid. It is so creative. It is so big and monstrous and all over the place. And so who better to show up in this world than queer people, who have constantly had to redefine who we are, who our families are, how we move through the world. And so that's what grief asks us to do. It asks us to redefine who we are, who our family is, how our sense of belonging. And so I think that what is also missing from grief is kind of the conversation that grief lasts a lifetime. That this is not something that you're going to go through steps and then you're suddenly going to have moved on, or you're going to like get through the year of your person dying and then suddenly you're going to feel better. Like what is actually true is that sometimes you're able to absolutely go through life as a normal human being, and then other times you are brought to your knees by grief still. And I know this not only from my own experience, but now when I'm working with people at the end of their lives, and I'm working with someone who's 97 years old, they're still crying because they wish their mom was there. And their mom died when they were 35. And so this is something that, like, I'm like, why are we pretending like grief is something that can be turned on and off? Like it is something that we can just conquer? And what if we made more space for the fact that this is something we get to accept into our lives as ours? Like that to me is acceptance and grief of like, this grief is mine now. And I get to do with it what I want to, and I get to use it in this way. And so how do we, as humans, like find ways to share our grief and to hold each other in our grief and to make space for the way that it changes and grows alongside of us for the rest of our lives, instead of feeling like we're doing something wrong because we're grieving 10 years later, or we've gone to the grocery store and something's made us fall apart, and then we think, oh God, there's something wrong with me, I should be over this by now. And so I think that the conversation of like, this is a lifetime, we get to make a relationship with our grief, and how do we do that? We have to have a lot of conversations about that, and how other people do it, and how we can learn from each other.
Plus one to all of that. Also, I'm stuck on what last song I want to hear. That's going to bother me for a long time.
I will find you all and ask that question.
It's the best question.
Wait, I don't know my answer either. I feel like it should be Britney Spears or something. Wait, can we talk
I'm
about
definitely having a Celine Dion impersonator at my funeral, and in drag, ideally.
A lot of ideas all of a sudden.
grief at work?
Yeah, let's talk about grief at work.
Okay, this is my favorite thing to talk about, because for anybody out here or out there or in just the world who runs a company, your wellness program at your company needs to explicitly include grief support, period, if you want to think about the overall well-being of your employees. Our workplaces are the front lines of grief support in America, whether or not we want that to be true, and whether or not that feels like workplace appropriate. The truth of the matter is, if you come back to work after 3 whole days of bereavement leave, you are not coming back to work as you were before the loss. You are not coming back to work just ready to type on your Excel spreadsheets and like read the urgent emails. I was so upset, literally getting emails marked urgent after my dad died. I was bitter about it. I was like, this isn't urgent. I know what's urgent. The phone call that I got that my dad dropped dead, that's urgent. It just changed my entire perception about work. The stats aren't the best because we don't have a federal policy on bereavement leave, so it's hard to track who leaves work for a while for a loss. But the general stats that we have are about 50% of people quit their jobs within a year after a loss. So if you think about it like monetarily, if our workplaces did a better job supporting people in their grief, if your boss knew how to talk to you about how to adjust your workload or to check in on your well-being in a way that's not like weird therapy awkward, but just like human to human, you can retain your employees better. And that is trainable. We offer workplace trainings. I train companies large and small on how to better talk to employees who are grieving, from manager to employee, from colleague to colleague, because it feels like crap when you come back to work and people are avoiding you. Everyone knows that you just went through a loss and no one's talking to you about it. That drives people to quit their jobs often. We can do a much better job there, and I would love to see that change writ large.
Absolutely, thank you for that. I'm wondering, have you ever gotten any kind of feedback or criticism for sort of commercializing grief in some way for any of you, and how do you navigate that? Because the wellness industry in general gets criticized for a lot of different things.
We sometimes charge for sad hours because a local business needs to get compensated for the drink tickets that you get. And I have gotten some really frustrated DMs and emails saying, like, why would you ever charge for grief support? And my response to that is, well, that's not the revenue generating part of my business in any way. This is about bringing people together. And also our businesses deserve to be compensated. I think that is hard. It's hard. If you want to create spaces to bring people together, there's labor involved in that deserves to be compensated for. But I think we have a mindset about grief support that it should always be unpaid labor, that it's a service that deserves to be given to every single person, and there's just a lot of tension there of, well, how do you operationalize that? Like, there has to be a way to compensate people for their time.
Only from the people who believe if we talk about death, it's going to happen. And so often I don't know how often you might get it, you probably not. I feel like you're pretty easygoing, but I get it all the time where people say, you need to stop talking about that. I don't want to talk about this. All you post is grief. I'm like, well, that's your algorithm. You must stay. That's a you problem. Because I'm gonna post it, but you found it. So only from those folks. But I think because I don't. It's what made me realize that people are ready to have these conversations. So I'm grateful that I haven't, but I do get that. Like, when people ask, how much do you charge for your services? I haven't figured that out, but it is not, I do not make money. I just overcharge conferences.
Exactly.
To pay for the people who are dying. Like, I haven't figured out how to charge people. I haven't charged people for my services. So if I have to fly somewhere, I might need a flight, but if it's a phone call, if I'm in town, of course I can come by. And so when I get that question, I know sometimes where it's headed by who's asking. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I love this question because I think when any moment or something is growing, right, we do run the risk of commercializing it to death. And taking away the magic and alchemy that is human connection. And so I feel like it's important to keep asking those questions because it is so important for all of us to be able to connect with so many different people. And that's why there are now so many different people doing this work and doing different work and bringing in collaborations that you would have never thought possible. And also there are some collaborations that don't need to happen. You know what I mean? We don't need to commodify, we don't need to exploit people even more than they already are. What I think we are doing is bringing back death and grief to the people. We are taking it away from predatory funeral homes, from places that feel like they can take advantage of you in your grief, and we're saying, no, this is real life. We get to make these decisions for ourselves, and we get to do so in a way that actually feels good and affirming to us, and there are no rules. Isn't that wild? There's actually no rules to this life. I mean, there are, but we get to memorialize people in the way that we want to. There are no rules for you have to have a funeral within 2 weeks of someone dying. There's no rules for, you can't start grief support until you've had at least 6 months away from the loss. We know now that all of those rules are kind of arbitrary, and we get to show up for grief and death in a really different way. And we are trying to bring more people into it as a community and human way, and not in a let's just figure out how we can techify and make money. You know, I think this is more how can we empower the people to take what is really ours, which is that we deserve to have a relationship with death and grief.
Got it. So I want to open up the floor to questions from the audience, but before that, just want to ask for one last question of all of you. What's something that you want people to take away from this conversation and do differently, maybe, whether they're grieving or not?
I want us all to know, and again, it's in my book, but I want us all to know that we've all done this work. It's not something I do because I have this special talent or gift, or it's not, death doulas aren't people who are not accessible. It's not a privilege to have a death doula or to be a death doula. And it takes nothing to go into a hospice or a hospital room or to someone you love and just be present and listen and be there. And we've done it, and it was just called love. And so when you hear the term death doula, it's kind of coming into the language, and it feels like this far away thing, but it's not. Your grandparents have done it. Even what you were just saying, I think it's getting back to one. Like, the things we're trying to do isn't new. It just skipped a few generations, and we're trying to go back to that place where we were loving each other and taking care of each other, and you come die in my home, and I will take care of you. And so, yeah, it's just being present and listening. And I encourage everyone to do that, to go into a hospice. I go to hospitals sometimes and just ask the nursing staff if anyone needs someone to just sit with them. And nurses are more than happy to not have to go in there sometimes. And they'll say, yeah, go and see so-and-so. And I'll go in there, and sometimes it's just playing cards. My niece taught me how to paint nails. So I'll go in with paint, and whatever that is. But we can all do it.
Yeah, I really like encouraging people to ask themselves the question, says who? When you're thinking about the way you show up for death, or your relationship to death, or your relationship to grief, and all of the things that we kind of inadvertently take on of, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, I should be feeling this way, this is what happens when you die and you should do this. Says who? Says who? And is it really something that is deeply ingrained in your core that you feel like is important and a value statement for you? Or is it something that's just kind of been pushed on us by our disconnection from death and grief? And now we're realizing that, oh, we get to have a relationship with this. We can empower ourselves through these topics that are generally thought of as being taboo, or that we shouldn't talk about. And so how can we re-examine our relationship to them and expand our minds? Expand. That is forever my best advice for anyone who's grieving or dying, is to just, how can we open our minds and our hearts a little bit more to this expansive experience?
That's so sweet. I love that.
I hope that people who are listening to our conversation today remember that grief is so normal. It's just a very normal human experience. And it is also incredibly difficult. It is debilitating. It is devastating. That does not mean you are weak. That does not mean you are doing it wrong. Your grief deserves space and time and care, and you are so normal. That's what I want people to know. You're normal.
Thanks so much. All right, let's take some questions.
So I'm Bruce Spector. I'm the founder and longtime chairman of Pinnacle Care. So I know healthcare navigation really well. What you're talking about here is really the last step of healthcare navigation. By far, it's the part where it's least developed to help people, but maybe the most important part of healthcare navigation, of wellness. But the service hasn't been provided yet. When you look at the service providers that are out there, and maybe this is a question more for Rebecca, at the end of life space, the funeral directors, the hospices, you made some reference to that. Who do you think's in the best position to provide that comprehensive service, the financial, the clinical, the emotional, to provide that last step of healthcare navigation? I think you're onto something really big here.
I love this question, Bruce. Thank you. And I think what you are really getting at is a question I ask all the time professionally. Who owns grief support? Who owns this domain? Who is supposed to be supporting each of us through grief and loss? What if we have someone who has not died in a hospital? My dad, for example, dropped dead on the floor at home. There was no hospital. There would be no healthcare navigator to help us through that grief. Is it the religious domain? Is it the spiritual domain? And I feel like the answer is all of the above. So one of the things that I'm working on personally right now is we're building out a grief support I can say that word. We're building out a grief support program at Duke University in the Brain Tumor Center where my mother was treated to design what grief support would look like for patients, for families, and for the healthcare providers who also have grief that is completely unacknowledged. Because I think, to your point, our hospital systems are potentially our best bet and our most comprehensive bet. But you also bring up funeral homes that I think there's a lot of complexity there, and I wonder if you have thoughts on that, Jamie, on whether they're the right arbiter. But I think my take on it is all of us are responsible for providing grief support to people.
Whoever can pull it all together and provide one-stop shopping is going to be onto something big. So you're working with the Tisch Center, is that where you are?
I am, yes.
Okay, we need to talk. I can
Would
help
love
you to
to.
monetize this.
Just to add on that, I'm not sure there is or should be a one-stop shop person. I think it is a collective, and I think that's the thing that I really appreciate about being a death doula is that I have made lots of different connections with lots of different people in hospital systems, in hospices, in funeral homes, in crematories, all over the place, and it is helpful to have someone who helps navigate all of those different systems. I'm never gonna be an expert in probate, but I know someone who can help. And so we need connectors, and we need people who are willing to show up for the really hard conversations, which is, what is the quality of life that you want? How can we get there with how much time do we have for that quality of time? And like, what do I need to know about you in order to give you the best care and support at the end of your life as possible? And oftentimes our healthcare systems are very focused on treatment and cure and prevention, and we are denying people good death experiences because we're not willing to talk, physicians aren't willing to talk about it. People aren't willing to say, you know what, I'm not sure if treatment is the right option right now, given what you're telling me about what you want to do with the rest of your life. And so we aren't having those conversations in the healthcare systems as much as I would like to see. So it's a group effort, y'all. This is a team project.
Yeah. And it shouldn't be the last stop. A big part of what I'm doing and a lot of the work I do is to have people, get people into these conversations when there is no threat, when there is no crisis, long before. Everyone in this room could be talking to a death doula about what it looks like to plan, because planning is love. A lot of us have had family members die, and we watched people fall apart. You know, we have family members we don't talk to anymore because we didn't talk about it before the moment. And so we should be having those conversations now, and you can line those people up before the crisis happens.
Thanks for that. Hey, y'all. My name's Alicia. I direct the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund. We are supporting the teams at BIPOC-led small media journalism enterprises. Yeah, it's good. And I guess this is partially a question about domain, but going deeper in this grief at work piece, we're working with teams of folks, we're working with leaders who are underinvested and under-resourced, and organizations and small businesses that oftentimes have little at best, but mostly no staff redundancy. And so I'm curious how y'all are thinking about grief support, bereavement support within these kinds of institutions, given that folks are at a lot of these intersections y'all are talking about. But also, what kind of shift do you think is possible, whether it is a philanthropic shift, an investor shift, a policy shift, because even if there was policy around bereavement leave, there's no revenue currently to subsidize folks on bereavement leave in these small businesses. So just curious, thoughts on that, advice, solutions?
I have so many thoughts that we should probably talk after because we're going to run out of time. First of all, and I'm just going to like stare at you while you're walking. First of all, it is a damn shame that we do not have federal policy around bereavement leave in this country, and that is completely inexcusable to me. That's like a whole nother conversation that we have to think writ large around policy change at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. But in the interim, the onus is on our businesses, pretty much, to provide bereavement support for their employees. That can be as simple as teaching people how to talk to each other, right? For some people, work is their anchor when they are going through a loss, and they do not want to take any time off, right? Like, how can we create workplace environments where grief is a part of our conversation with each other? To me, that training doesn't have to be super expensive. Also, for our small businesses, they can't afford very large, flexible workplace leave policies, which is, I would say, is the gold standard. I'd recommend that any business have bereavement leave that is able to be used over the course of a year after a loss. And maybe that's not feasible for our small organizations, our small companies. But I think we can work in free ways that we talk to each other better. And I would love to talk more about what that looks like on an individual level to kind of customize for a smaller org.
And we get to get creative for where we are finding funding. Like you were saying, I mean, and this is very different because I'm a death doula, but I am constantly looking for ways that people who are resourced can help provide for the people who are under-resourced. And so by providing a sliding scale for everyone that I work with, and also being like, yeah, I'm gonna charge a university to come talk to me, absolutely, or for me to talk to them. But then when someone who is an ex-sex worker and they're trans and they need help and support at the end of their life, I'm not gonna then negotiate with them about what they can pay. I'm gonna show up there because I'm a community member. This is a role for me, but I wanna make sure that there is funding available so that I can take care of myself and that I can provide resources for other people. And I know there's money out there, y'all. You know what I mean? Like, there is. I know that, like, I don't have it, but I'm waiting to find someone who does. So if anyone knows of anyone. But I just feel like that's really important, and that's how we get to build more infrastructure and support and care, is by redirecting funds or creating a fund or getting creative with donations and ways that we can get other people to give us money rather than putting the onus on the people who really need the support.
Next question, thanks.
Yes. Hi, my name is Garrison, and I also lost my father at the start of the pandemic 6 years ago. And in my experience, I noticed how detached we are culturally from being present with the body after it's left. And it doesn't seem like there's any change of that happening anytime soon. So I just was wondering, like, how does this cultural detachment from the corpse shape the way we experience or avoid grief?
Yeah, you know, we want to get through that as fast as possible. We've come to this place where we want to get it done, and you know, when the funeral home is there, we want to stay busy. And so as soon as that body can leave, we can get to the work of avoiding grief for at least the next 2 weeks. And a lot of the clients that I work with, a lot of the families of clients I work with, I encourage them to, one, have the conversation before the loss happens, but then two, once the death happens, it's here's how you can wash the body. And these things help with grief. You know, they can really help if we can get in there and do that work. We always say that death isn't a medical emergency. The body, again, says who? The body does not have to leave right away. You can sit there and start this ritual or whatever this is you want to do, but facing it. You know, and so when we avoid it, we're just buying time or borrowing time against what we're going to go through alone. At home in the shower, we're going to cry or whatever that is. But if we can just face it now, let's get to that work.
Yeah, I appreciate this question so much because as someone who, when my parents were dying, and my mom especially, I remember the advice or what hospice told me is, as soon as they die, you call us. So as soon as you die, you call us, and then we will call the funeral home, and they will come and get her. And I was just like, okay, that's what you do. You just, as soon as, and maybe you need to be really exact about the time. And I remember being like, I don't know exactly what time. And none of that actually really matters, especially when someone is dying at home. And so for me, I was like, I wish someone would have said, take all the time you need. One of the things that actually might be helpful for you is to sit with her body, is to memorize what her face feels like, to take another photo of you holding her hand, to cut a little piece of hair and keep it. And now when I'm with people who have died, one of the most magical moments is that moment after death, and we are just sitting around with the body, and we are thinking of ways to be with it, to just sit and tell stories. We are so scared of death that we are afraid to even touch dead people. Yeah. And I'm like, get in the bed, cuddle your dead person, it's okay. They're not, like, nothing is gonna jump out and haunt you. And but we don't have enough people who are normalizing what it is like to interact with a dead body, with death, with a dying person. And so we need more people who are giving us that permission. I wish someone had given me that permission. So now I feel really honored that I get to give that permission to other people. So I think it's a cultural shift in the way that we talk about death, but also in what happens after we die. There's no rush. We get to take all the time we need.
Can I just add that I just want to name out loud, this entire part of the conversation makes me want to throw up.
Valid.
Sorry. And like I said this to y'all at some point, and you were like, really? The only dead body I have ever seen in my entire life is my father. And I chose to go into the room where he had died. And I wanted to see the body. In some ways, I'm glad I did that, and in other ways, I am not. And when my grandmother died, not long after, I chose not to see the body because of how it felt to see my dad's. So I hear you, and like for me and where I sit, like that's not part of my own personal like grief experience that I want to push people. And I'm not saying you guys are pushing people towards it. I think it's all of just like, let's change the dialogue on what is acceptable.
We're giving people choice.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And like being able to have that choice. And I have many people who are like, I'm ready for them to go when they go. Like, let's call that funeral home ASAP. And no, I don't want to be in the room with them hanging out until the funeral home gets there. And that's so valid. And like, I think we are trying to create more experiences and more space. Again, that expansiveness for you get to do this your way in a way that makes sense for you. It's not always going to be, like, not every person is going to show up and be like, I want to wash my mother's body after she dies. Some people will, or some people might not know that's an option. And so we have to be able to give everyone their options and know that they're all valid.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think we have time for one last question. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Matthew, and I'll ask the question first, then give my experience, and then see what you have to say. So my question is, have you seen counseling or prep go wrong, or seen somebody just mishandle it completely, and then you'll be able to tell me if I'm just messed up or not. So my experience was, when I was 7, my mother was diagnosed with brain cancer. For me, the school, maybe they asked my parents, right? They didn't ask me, but they sent me to counseling with the guidance counselor, right? Once a week. She was given 3 months to live, then 6 months, then 2 years, and then it was 5 tops. There's just no way you're gonna live past 5 years. So with school, it was 2.5 years of counseling. It's been 30 years now, and she's still with me, right? So that's amazing, right? Like, I should be so grateful for all of that extra time, but at the same time, I feel like that 2.5 years of counseling, I was so prepped for it. It was everything shifted to Dad. Dad took up all the effort. Hey, Mom's gonna go away, Mom's gonna be gone. I felt like I was disassociated from her, right? I was so prepared for the loss that, okay, hi Mom, bye Mom. It sounds horrible, right? But that loss never came. And so even today, I feel like if she died today, I'd move straight to planning. Like, okay, whereas if it was my dad, like, I don't know what I would do. So it's like, is something wrong with me, or have others experienced this too?
Nothing's wrong with you. You're perfect. Gosh, I think I want to think about this broadly, and then like let's huddle in the corner because I would love to talk to you more about your personal experience. And I'm jealous that you've had so much time with your mom. I think that we have talked a lot about normalizing conversations around grief and loss. And I think there is something to be said of making that so normal that we scare people. So I mean, there's always balance in how we talk about anything in life. I'm sorry that your experience was complicated, and I would love to talk to you more about it.
Very sorry, we have to cut it off there, but we can dialogue later. Thank you all so much for coming. Hope this was helpful. Thank you to our panelists.